everybody.
Hello, hello, hello.
Thank you for connecting today for this webinar. We just finished a webinar in French, and now we begin the same webinar in English. And I would like to introduce Professor Sylvain Charlebois. Thank you for being with us. Early in the morning for you in Canada. We have students from Canada and colleagues from Canada, Europe, China, Africa. And thank you for your availability. The topic of your webinar will be innovative management strategy to address challenges. And we will see that there are a lot of challenges in agri-food sector in the era of sustainability and technology. Professor Sylvain Charlebois, you are a professor in Halifax in Dalhousie University in Canada. And you came to research through a DBA. And because we have a lot of DBA students who are connecting today, I wanted to mention that. Okay, I give you the floor, Sylvain, please.
Thank you, Professor Kalika. Again, thank you very much to BSC for inviting me to speak to you this morning. It's a pleasure. I hope one day to meet all of you in person eventually. I'm currently actually in Montreal. I'm traveling this week on a business trip. I've been meeting many companies this week in Montreal. And frankly, all of the discussions that I've had with companies are quite relevant to today's topic, really. A lot of companies are dealing with a complex environment, and that environment is becoming less and less predictable for a variety of reasons. And today's topic is very much about the future of food and how companies, governments, and consumers are coping with the realities of today's markets, and frankly, it's exciting, but also concerning because the nature of the agri-food business is quite peculiar in a way that it is very few sectors have to deal with a high volume, low margin environment. And also, there are numerous family owned businesses in the agri food sector, which actually makes the sector typically more risk averse than others. Uh, also, the nature of food is quite peculiar in that we all eat, but we all have values, and our culture, traditions will impact how we eat, our habits, but also it impacts how companies, businesses actually make decisions. The let's not break what's not broken philosophy is quite predominant in the food sector. But the problem today is that you can't really just not do anything. You have to change. You have to adapt. You have to do new things. And for that to happen, you need knowledge. You need research. And so today, during my webinar, I will actually give you a variety of different suggestions to actually inspire you, hopefully, to look into the agri-food sector as a future researcher, as a future scholar in general. So let me, here we are. Just before I go into the topic of the day, I just want to briefly talk about who I am and what I do. So I have a DBA since 2005 from the University of Sherbrooke. And as Professor Kalika just mentioned, I actually believe that DBAs can be very strong academic researchers just because of the nature of the degree itself. I have nothing against PhDs. I actually was supervised by PhDs myself. But with the DBA, you actually acquire the ability to understand both the academic and the practitioners' world, and this is kind of what we need more than ever in the agri-food sector. I've actually published extensively. I'm the editor of one of the top journals, food science journals in the world, Trends in Food Science and Technology. I've written 8 books. Most recently, this one book you see here, La Part du Gâteau. It's only in French. It's sold in France, I think, right now, and it's about food geopolitics. And food geopolitics, as you will see later in my presentation, is quite important, much more so than ever. Food unites us all, and what happens in China, Brazil, Europe, uh, North America will eventually impact you. We actually have experienced that with the pandemic just recently, and of course with the Ukrainian invasion. Even though it was probably far away from many, it really impacted the entire planet, and we are expecting more of these phenomena. Uh, if you want to call them black swan events, these phenomena aren't going to be irregular. They should be expected. But if they are to be expected, we have to tool ourselves well to manage the implications of some of these events in general. And I invite you, of course, to look at my Google Scholar profile, to look at the different papers that I've published over the last 25 years or so. So this is kind of the uh, conceptual framework that I'd like to present to you. It's basically the basis of my presentation today. I've always believed that food is a political economy, in that companies, nations influence each other, and each components of a system will have a different relationship amongst each other. So some companies, some nations will depend on each other, some will be in conflict, some will cooperate, and some will collaborate. And so, and this is really important for you to recognize, because really, when you think about systems, uh, there's always systems are always in evolution, and uh, one decision made by one entity will impact others, and how that entity reacts will redefine a new system. And that's why it's more and more complicated. Whether the whether decisions are made based on external factors, internal factors. External factors would be the environment, for example, the economy. Internal factors would be labor, currency, things like that. So more and more factors are being recognized as being quite influential for both companies and governments as well. So uh, at the middle of the conceptual framework, you have global agri-food risks, and of course, collaboration is key. More and more companies, because it's a high volume, low margin environment, agri-food companies don't tend to collaborate. They don't want to share as much because there's sensitive information. We're not too sure what we should be sharing or not. But of course, nowadays we're all facing the same problems, whether it's labor, currency, uh, pandemics, climate change. I mean, all these things are common denominators affecting all businesses. And so that's why collaborating is something that is fairly new, and there's always some discomfort. I've actually sat on to meetings with companies that are competing against each other, and you can feel that there is some discomfort. But I do believe that this is something that is going to be required for businesses to prosper over time. And this is one element. This is the concept that I call co-opetition. I didn't coin the term. It has existed for at least 2 decades. Co-opetition, cooperating with the competition. And this is something we're seeing more and more in the agri-food sector in particular. Transparency is another issue that we see more and more. The concept of transparency in agri-food is actually also very interesting, because on the one side, you have stakeholders that want to share, they want to be transparent, but on the other hand, they're slowly realizing that some things that they're sharing is not necessarily appreciated or liked by consumers or markets, and so they'll react in different ways. And I'm thinking about issues like the environment, organics, the ethical treatment of animals. All these things really are forcing companies to rethink their transparency agenda or approach. Environmental stewardship, of course, is very important. It's the topic affecting the agri-food sector. Really, it impacts everything. But there are two aspects to that. There's, of course, climate change, but there are policies to mitigate the impacts of climate change. And I'm talking specifically about the carbon market and how nations are actually reacting to the carbon market, how companies are reacting to the carbon market. And this is certainly one area that we need more research on for sure. And because there are all sorts of interpretations. And right now, we're seeing some companies embracing opportunities related to climate change, and some are just adapting and actually see this as a negative and not necessarily something that could be an opportunity down the road. And of course, the green boxes are very much about risks. We live in a risk society, and it was, I mean, a book that was a famous book called The Risk Society that was written many years ago. I actually encourage you to read it. It's a phenomenal book, and it's still relevant to this day. It's about how companies, how society actually manages risk, generally speaking. And of course, in the agri-food sector, risks are perceived and managed very differently due to the fact that they are many family businesses. Some businesses have been around for decades, centuries sometimes. And technological advancements aren't necessarily natural. And from one generation to another, they tend to resist to change because, well, again, traditions have made some of these companies quite successful. So why change? But the environment is changing, the market is changing, and that's why I think knowledge sharing is becoming more and more of a priority for many of these businesses. So, uh, of course, the core areas of focus related to the conceptual framework, sustainable practices are key. How to promote the sustainable use of resources, how do you actually optimize the use of resources is becoming key. Uh, the issue of carbon pricing is not going away. I think it's going to continue to be predominant. How companies actually manage that is going to be very, very important. And I think it's pushing companies to reevaluate their global supply chain. Where do you manufacture? What type of ingredient are you procuring? What market are you to be servicing based on your logistics? Uh, I uh, I do see many changes related to that in reaction to carbon pricing, and frankly, I think you just can't avoid it. I think more and more there's going to be a focus on that for sure. The use of technologies, of course, very important. Data analytics. This is what we do at the lab here in Canada. Very important. I actually do see changes in AI. Of course, a few months ago, BSC hosted a webinar on AI, which was extremely interesting. It was very much about how AI is being democratized by chatbots like ChatGPT, for example. What's interesting about the agri-food sector, in my opinion, is that AI has been around for a very long time for, I would say, the two ends of the food continuum, production and consumption. So in production, if you look at farming in general, farming is really has embraced new technologies and has increased yields, has become more productive, especially in the Western world. It's been incredible, really, using precision agriculture. It's the evolution has actually been quite rapid. On the other hand, with consumers, we've been exposed to AI for a very long time, but we've been explicit about it just well, since ChatGPT, really, we've been talking a lot about AI. This week I was in Montreal at meetings, and AI was the big theme. Everyone's talking about AI, whether it's in retail, logistics, processing, production. It's just been phenomenal. But in the middle of the supply chain, the food supply chain, you do see some weaknesses, some blind spots where AI hasn't been really influential. And so I think there is going to be some catching up in relation to the industry overall with AI over the next several years. Traceability, big theme. It's been a priority for the food industry for many years now. Food safety really pushed companies to look at traceability. But over the last few years, food authenticity has actually been the driver. So people want to know whether their label is accurate and what kind of information can actually flow through the supply chain. I actually had a meeting again this week with GS1. Uh, Basically, GS1 is talking about a double layered barcode to be able to capture more information to convey to the public whether or not, well, where was the food produced? When was it harvested? When was it processed? By whom? And whatnot, because there is a need to provide more information to the marketplace. And right now, the entire supply chain with the barcode that we see is not well equipped. We're talking about blockchains more and more, so recalls can be managed in real time as quickly as possible instead of focusing on one lot and recalling many products that may not be contaminated, which leads to more waste. Actually, we are looking at becoming more precise with recalls and reduce waste essentially, and optimize resources as much as possible. Uh, Adaptive management, of course, responsive strategies are going to be really critical, all in real time. Predictive analytics is going to be absolutely key. Understanding the future before it happens. The one thing about the agri-food sector is that, you know, as a consumer, you'll need a car, you'll need clothing, you'll need shoes, you'll need medication. You can basically decide when you will, based on your finances, based on your needs, etc. But when it comes to food, since we buy every day or we eat every day, we make decisions quite regularly, whether it's at the restaurant or at the grocery store. Uh, we're influenced by factors that may not be clear. Implicitly, we're impacted by all sorts of factors, including like the weather, for example. And so companies are trying to figure out what the demand will be for certain products based on the weather, for example. So if you equip yourself with, say, for example, uh, with meat, and that weekend or ice cream, and that weekend is just not, the weather is not great, you're going to sell less of it. So, how do you predict to make sure that you have the supplies to sell to a consumer base that is looking for certain products? So that's certainly one thing that we look at very closely. This week, I actually visited a distribution center in Canada, in Montreal. It opened up 2 weeks ago, and they're using predictive analytics. That center supports 700 different retail stores. And because of predictive analytics, they're able to supply stores with the food they think they'll need due to the weather, due to the economy, because every single store will deal with a microclimate, will deal with a specific market. And so, how do you actually adapt with that? And that's really something that is going to become more and more predominant in the agri-food sector. Risk management, again, market volatility has been incredibly violent in recent months across the world. We have seen many countries, developed countries in the Western world, with the food inflation rates of above 20%. France and Germany are two examples. So how do you actually deal with volatility as a sector? And that's certainly one area that I would say would require some attention from DBAs in particular. And so how inflation is impacting consumers, how it is impacting businesses, and how it's impacting policy as well. Cybersecurity. Uh, what we've seen in recent months is incredible. More and more pirates, companies, or people are actually aiming at the agri-food sector to make a point. And it's not just ransoms. They're not seeking for money. We are now seeing farmers. There was a hog farmer, a major hog farmer in Canada, that actually was cyber attacked, and the cyber attackers were asking the farmers to apologize for the treatment of his animals. So obviously, this group is concerned about the ethical treatment of animals. So that group wanted the farmer to apologize. That's it. So you're seeing that you're seeing that the food supply chain is becoming more and more vulnerable to cyber attacks. And so, how do you actually cope with that risk in particular over the next several years? And of course, knowledge management is a big key here. How do you actually manage knowledge? How do you actually foster knowledge? How do you share knowledge as well? I talked about collaboration. I mean, this is something that I'm seeing more and more with the concept of co-opetition. Of course, it's not just about aligning yourself with some partners that would want to collaborate, but it's about collaborating with the competition. And because they're all companies are facing the same issue. That's the so collaboration is becoming more and more important to foster innovation. What is innovation in the food sector? And this is one area that I think needs some attention as well. How do you define food innovation? Is food innovation about the next flavor, or is it about substantial changes to logistics, to how you manage data, how you actually train people, how do you actually deal with external risks, geopolitics? How do you predict? Um, so those are the things that people will want to know more about. And I've always believed that innovation has a really awkward relationship with food. In pharmacy, in automotive technologies, we kind of have a sense of what um, innovation is. It's about being faster, more efficient. It's more this, more that. In food, it's not more may not necessarily be better or may not be innovative. And so that's why it's important to understand what innovation actually means and how you can actually grow the economy, the agri-food economy, how you can grow the business over time. And also transparency and communication. Communication is really something that I think is missing. Uh, this is my own opinion. At the basis of an agri-food system, you have a social contract that is incredibly fragile between the industry and markets. And I actually think that unlike 10, 15, 20 years ago, this moral contract is being redefined almost on a daily basis. And that redefinition is motivated by what people are looking for. And what they're looking for today may not be the same as yesterday. Companies are also looking to redefine its social contract. And in order to do that, you need to interact with the public. And I've always believed that the agri-food sector is lagging in that area. I think it's important for companies to interact with, and of course, I'm thinking about social media in particular. And with social media, I actually think that there are some shortcomings there. I do believe that there are some shortcomings in terms of how to interact with the public, what information you convey, when you do it, and are there decisions that you're making that may actually uh, be in breach with the social contract you have with markets, and that's certainly something that we're seeing more companies making decisions, reversing decisions based on reactions they see on social media. That sensitivity, I think, needs to be clearly recognized. And again, another avenue that perhaps DBAs could look into in the future. Of course, governments are a big key here. Uh, as many other sectors, the agriculture sector is incredibly regulated for a variety of reasons. Of course, it is a global industry, but it's also an industry that requires guidance and acceptability as well. Um, and I do want to underscore geopolitics here. Of course, I just released my new book, but I think it's important to realize, going back to the political economy discussion that I had that we talked earlier. I actually do think that food geopolitics are going to become more and more influential for many companies, and we saw that with Ukraine. We're seeing that right now with Russia, with China, with Brazil. Um, I'm here in Canada, and I can tell you that Canada is heavily influenced by the United States. Uh, and I've mentioned that many times. We are prisoners of our own geography. No matter where you are in the world, your geography will also define how geopolitics are impacting your business, and also laws and regulations that are adopted in your own country. Or your own district in particular, and so that's something certainly that also needs to be recognized overall. I don't think we talk about it far enough, and that's another acts of research that I think should be explored by DBAs as well. Incentives for innovation, of course. Again, uh, on because agri-food is a high volume, low margin environment, capitalizing the system is has always been very difficult. Um, Investors, venture capitalists, banks will always look at the agri-food sector as an uninteresting sector because it's hard to actually make money very quickly. It's much easier to make money very quickly in other sectors. So it's often been undercapitalized, which is why the role of the state has always been critical to support uh, startups, to support ventures, to actually increase capacity for certain production, and that's why food is political, is inherently political, because often governments and entities will always actually make issues very public, and everyone will have an opinion. Certain governments will actually pick losers and winners. Other governments will actually try to support anything and everything. What is the right path? What is the right solution? Well, it depends where you are. It depends of well of politics. What is the appropriate economic approach for the time? And sometimes, depending on what's going on around the world, the right approach may not be right tomorrow. So again, very complicated for sure. Uh, in terms of implementation tools, of course, decisions have to be made, uh, and they have to be informed as much as possible. Uh, Capturing data is very important, but the one thing about decisions is that, well, decisions are always based on imperfect information. We all know that. And you're learning that, I'm sure, during your doctorate. But the what is being reevaluated is the quality of the data because of AI, because of the amount of information that we have access to. It's something that really companies are evaluating. As a lab in Canada, we actually evaluate the quality of the data that is released by Statistics Canada, for example, a federal agency, and we are realizing that there are limitations to what they're releasing, and that's what I say to my students often is that, well, agencies provide indicators. They don't necessarily provide accurate information. That's very important. Accurate information will be assessed uh, based on your ability to assess the quality of the data. That's basically how it works. And so that's why a lot of companies will actually make different decisions. And of course, performance metrics are becoming critical. And this is something that we weren't seeing a whole lot before, but companies are actually, measuring success, and they're trying to figure out what does success look like in the future, and how do you actually measure performance over time. And before, the paradigm was pretty simple in agri-food. For many, many decades, many centuries, you produce and then you find a market. But there has been a paradigm shift focused on demand. And many years ago, I published a paper called Demand Chain Management. So understanding demand and actually structure the entire sector based on that changing demand. And this is something that we're seeing more and more often. And it can be in uh, customer service. It can happen in R&D at retail, in processing, genetics as well. For example, I'm involved in the project with pasta, for example, and we try to figure out what kind of wheat do you need in order for pasta to be to remain al dente, for example, even if it's overcooked. So al dente spaghetti, even though it's overcooked, because to get al dente spaghetti, you have to cook the pasta at for a certain time. But if you actually fail at cooking spaghetti at the right temperature at the right time, you may not get al dente. But we're trying to figure out a way to uh, basically make sure that no matter what happens in the kitchen, you will get al dente spaghetti. That's just one example. So innovation can actually happen in very different places, but it boils down to how the product is performing over time and how farmers are performing over time and how they can actually increase yields. I'll finish on this note. A shameless plug of our podcast. Our podcast has been around for about 4 years now. It is the top management podcast in Canada. It's called The Food Professor, and it is produced by my good friend Michel Leblanc. And every week we have an episode with guests, and on several occasions we've actually had scholars joining us for a conversation about the future of food. This week's episode is about AI, and we have a super cluster in Canada called Scale AI, and the director actually of that super cluster joined us for a nice conversation about the use of AI in the food industry. And so, on that note, I'm going to throw it back to Professor Kalika, who I see already right now, ready for, I'm sure, for some very interesting questions.